For 20 years, I thought I knew everything about my husband. We were that couple, the ones friends envied, the ones who finished each other's sentences, who danced in the kitchen barefoot at midnight. He was gentle, steady, always there when I needed him. But there was one thing, one room in our house he never let me into. "It's just my space," he'd say with a soft smile, brushing it off like it was nothing. A man needs a little corner to himself, right? I never questioned it. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? But last Sunday morning, everything changed. He left in a rush, his phone buzzed, he muttered something about an emergency at work, kissed me on the forehead, and was gone. He'd left his keys behind. And in those keys, was the key. The key to the one room he never let me in. My heart pounded as I stood in front of the door. Part of me said no, don't do it, respect his space. But another part, the part that had grown uneasy over the years without understanding why, said, open it. You deserve to know. What I saw when I turned that key, God, I still can't say it out loud without shaking. Before I tell you what was inside, I want to say this: if you've ever had even a flicker of doubt about someone you love, if you've ever ignored that tiny voice in the back of your mind telling you something's off, then stay with me. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next, because this is where the truth begins to unravel. I opened the door slowly, afraid of what I might find. The smell hit me first, stale, metallic, like something long hidden from the world. The light flicked on, revealing shelves. Walls covered with photos. Not of me. Not of us. But of her. A woman I didn't recognize. Over and over, from different angles, in different places. Smiling. Walking. Unaware she was being watched. My stomach turned. And then I saw it, something that made my knees buckle. On the desk was a journal. His journal. The first line read, "She thinks I've never loved anyone but her." I stared at those words, my fingers trembling as I turned the page. She thinks I've never loved anyone but her. That sentence screamed at me, louder than any fight we'd ever had, louder than the silence that used to settle between us when we didn't know what to say. Page after page, he wrote about her, her scent, her laugh, how he followed her for months before ever speaking to her. There were dates, descriptions of where she went, what she wore, who she was with. It was like reading a novel written by a stranger, except the author was my husband. He wrote about our marriage, too, but not in the way I'd imagined. He called it his cover. Said it gave him stability, a life that looked normal so no one would question the time he spent watching her. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I sank to the floor, that journal open in my lap, pages fluttering like the wings of a trapped bird. And then I saw a photograph tucked between two pages. It was her again, but this time, she wasn't alone. She was holding a child. And standing next to her, was him. My husband. Smiling. Holding the baby's tiny hand. My blood ran cold. The timestamp in the corner. It was taken 5 years ago. 5 years ago, when I thought he was away on a business trip. 5 years ago, when I was homesick with the flu, and he sent flowers to say he missed me. I dropped the photo and ran to the back of the room. There were drawers, dozens of them, each labeled with dates, names, little codes I didn't understand. I opened one. Birth certificates. A lease agreement. A second phone. He had another life. Another family. And I had no idea. If you're still listening, I need you to hear me. It doesn't matter how perfect someone seems. It doesn't matter how much they say they love you. If there's a locked door in your relationship, literal or emotional, you owe it to yourself to ask why. Because behind mine was a truth I never could have imagined. I sat there for what felt like hours, numb. The air was thick with betrayal. The man I'd built a life with, grown old with, cried with, laughed with, he had a second home, a second identity. And the craziest part? I never suspected a thing. I'd blamed myself for the distance that had crept into our marriage over the years. Told myself it was just how long-term love went, less fire, more comfort. I thought his late nights were just stress, his silence just exhaustion. But now, I realized, it was guilt. Or maybe not even guilt, maybe it was calculation. I picked up the second phone. It was still charged. I swiped up, no passcode. His arrogance, or maybe his carelessness, had left the truth wide open. Messages. Hundreds of them. From her. Thanks for tucking him in tonight. He asked where his daddy was. Did she suspect anything this time? Are we still on for the cabin next weekend? I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't let me. Rage was there, clawing up from my stomach, but it was tangled with grief, confusion, and this unbearable question, was anything real? Then the front door opened. His footsteps. He was home. I didn't even have time to hide what I'd found. He walked into the hallway and froze when he saw the door to the room, his room, wide open. His face drained of color. I stood up, holding the journal, the photo, the phone. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a shallow breath. I asked the only thing I could manage. Who are you? And he just said. I can explain. Let me know if you want to hear what happened next, because what he told me wasn't just twisted, it was something straight out of a nightmare. He stepped forward, hands slightly raised like he was approaching a wild animal, like I was the one who'd lost control. His voice was calm. Too calm. I never meant for you to find out like this, he said. My voice shook. You mean you planned for me to never find out at all? He nodded slowly. At first, yes. But later, it got complicated. Complicated. That word echoed in my head like a scream muffled underwater. I looked around the room, the photos, the documents, the life he'd built in secret, and asked the question that burned at the core of everything. Do you love her? He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Yes. My heart cracked open. I couldn't decide which part hurt more, that he admitted it, or that part of me already knew the answer. She was part of my life before you, he continued, voice quiet. It was over when I met you. At least, I thought it was. But when she reached out again, and told me about the child. He looked at me then. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose either of you. Tears stung my eyes, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of falling. So you chose both. Without telling either of us the truth. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt yourself, I snapped. Don't pretend this was for anyone but you. I could feel something inside me shift, like the ground under my feet had finally cracked wide open, and I was staring into the pit of 20 years built on a half-truth. I asked him one last question. Not out of curiosity, but because I needed to hear it out loud. Was anything real? He looked away. And in that silence, I got my answer. I left the room. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just walked past the life I thought I knew, past the kitchen where we'd danced, the couch where we'd curled up for movies, and stepped out into the world, alone, but finally free. The story didn't end that day. The fallout, the conversations, the unraveling of everything we'd shared, it came in waves. But so did something else. Clarity. Strength. A reminder that even in the darkest betrayal, you can find your way back to yourself. It took me a week to find the courage. I stared at her face in those photos so many times I started to memorize every feature, her soft eyes, the gentle smile. She didn't look like a homewrecker. She looked kind. Like someone who'd bake muffins for her neighbors or cry during commercials. And that terrified me more than anything. Because it meant she might not even know about me. I found her address from the lease agreement I'd seen in that drawer. I stared at it for days. Typed it into my GPS more than once, only to close the app. But eventually, I drove there. parked across the street. She lived in a small house with a blue mailbox and toys scattered across the lawn. I watched as a little boy came running out the front door, his son. I could see it so clearly now. The same eyes. The same way of scrunching his nose when he laughed. And behind him, her, the woman who unknowingly helped destroy my world. I walked up the path, my hands shaking so hard I nearly knocked twice before stopping myself. What was I even going to say? But then the door opened. She looked surprised, cautious, like she didn't quite recognize me. "Hi, can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "My name is Claire. I'm his wife." Her face dropped. Not confused. Not shocked. Just broken. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, her hands clenched at her sides. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, two women on either side of the same betrayal. "I thought you were divorced," she whispered. "I thought you didn't exist." That's when the tears started, not hers. Mine. She sat on the porch steps and I joined her, knees weak. What came next wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a screaming match or a tug-of-war over a man who didn't deserve either of us. It was a grieving. Together. She told me her side, how he told her they'd separated, how he never let her meet his ex because it would be too painful. How he was only ever around on certain weekends, always with reasons why he couldn't stay overnight. And then I told her mine. We cried. We cursed. We held hands, strangers pulled into the same wreckage. And somewhere in that moment, something shifted in both of us. We realized we weren't enemies. We were survivors. He built a life on lies. But we were finally free to rebuild something honest. After that day on her porch, something inside me snapped free from the fog of confusion and pain. I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his lies, not for myself, not for my own sanity. I made a decision, I was going to reclaim my life, piece by piece, on my own terms. First, I told my closest friends, the ones who had always seen me as strong, even when I felt anything but. Their support was a lifeline. They helped me sort through the mess of emotions, offered shoulders to cry on, and reminded me who I really was beneath the betrayal. Then came the hardest step, talking to him again. This time, no more silence, no more half-truths. I demanded answers, accountability. Not for revenge, but because I needed closure. He begged for forgiveness. Said he was sorry. Said he'd lost himself somewhere along the way. But I could see the cracks in his words, the same cracks I'd ignored for years. I realized forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me, to let go, to stop carrying the weight of his mistakes. With every day that passed, I found new strength in the little things, walking in the park, cooking my favorite meals, rediscovering passions I'd shelved away for the sake of a perfect marriage. I even started writing again, pouring my story onto paper, turning pain into power. And here I am, sharing this with you, not because I want sympathy, but because if you're listening and struggling with your own locked doors, your own secrets, know this, you are not alone. Sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the strongest versions of ourselves. I started small. The first thing I did was rearrange the bedroom. It sounds silly, maybe, but after 20 years of sleeping on the same side of the bed, staring at the same ceiling, I needed to reclaim the space. I swapped the curtains, moved the furniture, even changed the sheets, something light, something fresh. It felt like a declaration to myself, this is mine now. Then I got rid of the little things that whispered his name when I walked by, the jacket he left on the coat rack, the mug he always used, the book he never finished. Not out of bitterness, but because every object held a version of him I no longer recognized. I started therapy. It was awkward at first, sitting across from someone who asked questions I wasn't sure I could answer. But over time, I found myself talking more than I expected. About how I had lost pieces of myself trying to hold together a life that was never fully mine. About how I stopped asking for what I needed because I thought love was supposed to be sacrifice. I realized I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd lost myself. And now, I was finding her again. I took solo trips, nothing extravagant. Just a weekend by the ocean, a cabin in the woods, a night in a hotel downtown. I started saying yes to things I used to turn down. Dinners with friends. A pottery class. Late night drives with the windows down and music blasting. I cried. I laughed. Sometimes at the same time. And slowly, the pain started to soften, not disappear, but lose its sharpness. The woman from the other life? We stayed in touch. We were trauma-bound at first, but over time, something kinder grew between us. She was navigating her own wreckage, raising a child who now knew the truth. We promised each other, no more secrets. Not for ourselves. Not for the people we love. And him? He faded. He still called. Still texted. Still asked if there was any hope. But there wasn't. Hope, I'd learned, is sacred. And I was saving it for me. I built a new life. Not perfect. Not neat. But real. And real, I've learned, is worth everything. I wrote this letter to myself a year after the day that changed everything. At the time, it felt strange, writing to a version of me that barely made it through. But now, I read it every year. And every year, I cry for her, and I thank her, for surviving. Dear me. You didn't deserve what happened to you. You didn't miss the signs, because you were foolish. You missed them because you loved fully, with trust, with hope, with the kind of faith that makes love worth having in the first place. You loved someone who made you believe you were safe. You believed in a future built with shared memories, inside jokes, quiet routines. And that belief wasn't wrong. It made you strong. It made you beautiful. But then came the door. And behind it, a truth so sharp it cut through everything you thought was real. You thought it would destroy you. And maybe, in some ways, it did. But look at you now. Still here. Still breathing. Still becoming. You are not defined by his lies. You are not shaped by the betrayal. You are shaped by what came after, the rebuilding, the courage, the nights you cried and still got up in the morning. You are made of grit and grace. You learned how to say no. How to say not anymore. You learned to take up space again. You started laughing with your whole chest, dancing in your kitchen again, but this time, for you. I love you for not giving up. For forgiving yourself. For letting yourself heal on your own timeline. You opened the door to the worst day of your life. And walked through it into your best self. Keep going. There's still more joy ahead. Love. Me. And reading that letter now still makes my hands shake, not because I want sympathy anymore, but because if you're listening and struggling with your own locked doors, it happened quietly, your own secrets, like most beautiful things do. You are not alone. I wasn't looking for love. Sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the strongest versions of ourselves. I didn't even believe in it the way I used to. I started small. I had rebuilt my life around me. The first thing I did was rearrange my boundaries, my peace. It sounds silly, I was no longer someone who waited at windows or walked on side of the bed, staring at the same ceiling. Whole again. I needed to reclaim the space. And then, I swapped the curtains, while volunteering at a local book drive, changed the sheets. I met Daniel. Something light, something fresh. He wasn't flashy. It felt like a declaration to myself, lines or this is mine now, sweeping charm. Then I got rid of the little things that whispered his name when I walked by, like we'd met 1,000 times he left before. On the coat rack, the mug he always safe used, in his presence, the book he never finished, patient, unassuming. Not out of bitterness, but because every object held a version of him I no longer recognized. I started therapy. He was a widower. It was awkward. I told him I was sitting across from someone who asked questions I wasn't sure I could answer. But over time, I found myself talking more than I expected, gently, consistently, about how I had lost pieces of myself trying to hold together a life that was never fully mine. He knew about how I stopped asking for what I needed. I told him because I thought love was supposed to be sacrificed. My voice shaking as I spoke it out loud again. I realized I hadn't just lost a husband. Didn't
I'd
offer
lost
pity
myself.
or outrage. And now,
He just listened.
I was finding her again.
Held my hand.
I took solo
Said,
trips.
that must have
Nothing
been so
extravagant.
lonely.
Just
No
a
one had
weekend
ever
by
put
the
it that
ocean,
way before.
a cabin in the woods,
Lonely.
a night in a hotel downtown.
Yes.
I started
That was
saying
what it had
yes to
been.
things I used to turn down.
Not just betrayal.
Dinners with friends,
Loneliness in plain sight.
a pottery class,
And slowly,
I
late
learned
night
that
drives
real
with
love,
the windows down
the kind
and
that
music
doesn't ask
blasting.
you to shrink, the
I
kind that
cried.
meets you where you are,
I
isn't
laughed.
loud or demanding, sometimes at
It's
the same
steady.
time. It's
And
honest.
slowly,
the pain
it's
started to
safe.
soften, not disappear,
Daniel and I didn't
but lose
rush.
its sharpness.
We moved slowly.
The woman from the other life.
Carefully.
We stayed in
With
touch.
reverence
for the wounds we both
carried.
We were trauma-bound at first,
We
but
learned
over
to speak
time,
openly,
something
to
tender
disagree
grew without
between us.
fear, to let silence
She was
be peaceful
navigating her
instead
own
of
wreckage,
terrifying, raising a child
I
who
didn't
now
need
knew
him
the
to
truth.
save me.
We promised
did
each
hold
other,
my hand
no
as
more
I
secrets.
saved myself.
Not for
And
ourselves.
now,
When I laugh,
I mean
not
it.
for the people we love. When I say, I
And
love
him,
you, I'm not losing
he
myself
faded.
in those words.
He
I'm
still
bringing
called.
myself to them. Still texted.
So,
If you're still listening,
still asked
if your
if there
heart
was any
is
hope.
broken, if your trust
But there
feels beyond
wasn't.
repair, I want you
Hope,
to know,
I'd learned,
this isn't
is
where your
sacred.
story ends. And I was
The
saving
room
it
may
for
have
me.
shattered what came before.
I built a new life.
But what comes after?
Not perfect. That's yours to build.
Not neat.
I used
But
to
real.
think the worst thing that could happen
And
in a
real,
marriage
I've
was
learned,
betrayal, is worth everything. But I've learned that the real
I wrote
tragedy
this
is
letter to
abandoning
myself
yourself
a year after the day
quietly,
that changed
daily,
everything.
in the name of keeping
At the
something
time,
together that
it
was
felt
already
strange,
falling apart. Writing to a version of
The
me
day
that
I
barely
opened
made
that
it
locked
through.
door,
I didn't
but
just
now,
uncover his
I
secrets.
read it every year.
I uncovered
And
my
every
own
year,
strength. I cry for her. I
and
found
I
the
thank
version
her
of me
for
that had been
surviving.
buried under compromise,
Dear me,
under fear, under
you didn't
what would
deserve
people
what
think?
happened to you.
I found
You
the woman
didn't
who could
miss the
stand in the
signs
wreckage of a
because you
lie
were
and still
foolish.
choose truth. You missed them
And
because you
now,
loved fully,
I
with
live
trust,
honestly.
with hope, with the kind
I
of
love
faith that makes
fearlessly.
love worth having in the first
I
place.
ask hard questions and give
You
real
loved
answers.
someone who made you believe you were
I
safe.
walk into rooms with my head
You
high,
believed in
even
a
if my
future
heart
built with
still
shared
carries
memories,
scars.
inside jokes.
That locked
quiet
door
routines.
wasn't the end of my life.
And that belief
It
wasn't
was the
wrong.
beginning
of my life on my
It
own
made you
terms.
strong.
To
It
anyone
made you
listening
beautiful.
who feels that tug in your
But
gut,
then came
that
the door.
whisper that something isn't right,
And behind
please,
it,
a
don't
truth
ignore
so
it.
sharp it cut through
Trust
everything
your
you thought was
instincts.
real.
Trust
you thought
your
it would
worth.
destroy you. And know that
And
even if the
maybe,
truth
in
hurts,
some ways,
you will survive
it did.
I
But
did.
look at
you now.
And I'm finally
Still
free.
here. If this
Still
story
breathing.
moved you, or if it sounds
Still
like something
becoming.
someone in your life needs
You
to
are
hear,
not defined by
subscribe
his
to the
lies.
channel.
You
Share
are not
it.
shaped by the betrayal.
Because the more we speak these
You are
truths,
shaped by
the
what
fewer
came
locked
after,
doors
the
will
rebuilding,
exist, the courage,
Thank
the
you
nights
for
you
listening.
cried and still got up in the morning. You are made of grit and grace. You learned how to say no. How to say not anymore. You learned to take up space again. You started laughing with your whole chest, dancing in your kitchen again, but this time, for you. I love you for not giving up. For forgiving yourself. For letting yourself heal on your own timeline. You opened the door to the worst day of your life. And walked through it into your best self. Keep going. There's still more joy ahead. Love. Me.